Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Making Live Music Accessible, a panel brought to you by Accessing the Arts Group, which is looking at trying to make the arts more accessible. And thanks to Accessible Arts for having us all here today. I would like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Gadigal land today, and I'd like to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend those respects to any First Nations people joining us for this live stream and to the First Nations people of New South Wales and beyond. My name is Emily Collins. I'm the Managing Director of Music New South Wales, the state music body here in New South Wales. My pronouns are she, her, and today I am coming to you with my long blonde hair. I'm a woman in my 30s and I've got red glasses on. A little bit about Music New South Wales. We're the state music body here. We run programs to support artists and industry professionals to have thriving music careers. And we also advocate for the health, development and sustainability of the contemporary music sector. So about this panel, today I'm joined by a gorgeous panel of experts from the music industry and disability sector. Rowena Collett, Eliza Hull, Jane Slingo and Alistair Hill. We're going to discuss how music companies, music venues, and music festivals can amp up their approach for accessibility, for the inclusion of music practitioners and audiences with disability. Before we get started, I'd like all the panelists to introduce themselves, and I'll start with Rowena Collett.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really looking forward to this conversation. My name's Rowena and I'm also coming to you today from Gadigal land, and my pronouns are also she and her. And I'm a disabled musician coming from the classical area of music, actually. I'm an orchestral flute player back in the day, and now working as an arts consultant specialising in diversity, access and inclusion. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to sort of chat music today, because I think when we talk about disability in the arts, often we talk about other art forms. So it's really great to have a music focused conversation today.
Thank you, Rowena. Jane Slingo.
Hey, thanks, Emily. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Jane Slingo. I'm also coming from Gadigal country today and also want to pay my respects to elders past, present. My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman in my 40s. I have a blondie, brownie coloured bob with a fringe. I have blue eyes and white skin, and I'm wearing a white t-shirt with a black rim on the sleeve and a black rim on the neck. As my job, I am the director of EMC, otherwise known as Electronic Music Conference. We are an annual conference and festival held in Sydney, and we also run a number of virtual events called EMC Connect, and we have a virtual showcase series running at the moment called United We Stream. And I'm also a practicing artist manager, managing two artists based in Brisbane, Sampology and Middle Name Dance Band. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you, Jane. Eliza.
Hi, how you going? My name's Eliza Hull. I'm really happy to be here. I'm coming from you from Jar Jar Wurrung land. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a white female. I have brown curly hair and it's to my shoulders. And today I'm wearing a blue and white striped top and I have some red lipstick on. And behind me, I have some art and also some children's art pictures that I made with my daughter as well of a bear and a picture of a pear as well on the wall. I am a person with a physical disability. I have a condition called Charcot-Marie tooth, and I am a musician. I've been a musician for a long time. I've been singing since I was 5 years old and practicing musician for over 10 or 15 years now, which is incredible to say out loud. But yeah, I am very passionate about inclusion and accessibility, especially within the contemporary music space for me.
Fantastic. Thank you, Eliza. Thanks for joining us today. And Alistair, do you want to speak to us?
Hi, I'm Al. I am, my pronouns are he and him. I am in my early 30s and I am beaming in from Gadigal land also. I look crazy because I have been popping hay fever tablets all morning, so my face is really puffy, but my mum is Chinese from Hong Kong and my dad is English, and he used to have an afro when he was younger. So if you imagine Chinese hair combined with an afro and a puffy face and a COVID beard, that is probably what I look like right now. I'm also wearing a flannel shirt, and I've fully embraced kind of working and living my whole life in my living room. For my job, I'm the senior producer of contemporary music at the Opera House. So I'm involved in the curation and delivery of a wide array of contemporary music events. And I've worked there since 2011 when I was an intern. So I feel very lucky to be able to work in such a beautiful space with some very amazing teams. I also make music, and I've probably already been talking for too long. So thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Alistair. Okay, let's get into it. I might start with you, Eliza, because I love starting with musicians. Running the state music body, I always love to centre musicians in everything that we do because they're so incredibly important for our music industry. When we talk about accessibility and inclusion in the arts, we often talk about it from the viewpoint of audiences. Can you talk to us? And, audiences are obviously incredibly important and their experience is really important for accessing music. But I'm really keen to hear about some of the challenges music professionals face. And I would love to hear about your experiences of being a musician with disability and, some of the things you've observed from your personal career, but also maybe things you've heard from other musicians that you might be able to share as well.
Yeah. Well, as I said before, I have a physical disability. So I guess the biggest barrier for me is that often I can't get up on the stage, which is a huge barrier. So there have been countless venues where I've had to be carried up onto the stage because stages are like one big step often, so there's not even a step going up, and so often I've had to actually be physically carried up. Sometimes they might have stairs but they don't have any railing, and I need railing to be able to get upstairs. Also just not being able to hang out with my bandmates backstage because often the venue will have a backstage area but it's up 3 flights of stairs, so it's just that feeling of not feeling like I'm, actually feeling like I'm kind of second class, like I can't hang out with my friends. It's a definite barrier. I just recently created an online stream called Accessible All Areas that I partnered with Isolate on. And I heard from 3 musicians that were all international artists, and all of them said that they faced barriers getting into venues. So 2 of the artists were wheelchair users and they couldn't even actually get into the venue. They couldn't get up on stage. Sometimes they'd have to have their wheelchair actually physically lifted up onto the stage. So there's big barriers, not feeling like you can perform in a venue is huge. Automatically that makes you feel like you're unwelcome.
Absolutely. And how would you describe, the response from, say, music venues or people within the music industry when you've had to, explicitly articulate, your needs like that? What's the general response been?
To be honest, for a very long time, there has been just complete denial of the fact that access isn't a priority. But recently, I don't know what it is, but it's like things are changing. I really, really feel that. And venues are trying. And just recently I did an event where I performed and I arrived at the venue and the person that had curated the event was just said, I am so sorry, I completely forgot we have a stage without any stairs or railing up onto the stage. Like, what can we do? We need to change this whole event. And they just automatically went, okay, we're going to do the whole event on the floor. So yeah, I feel like that kind of, it's a good attitude to have. Like, let's change this event and let's make it like across the board so that every artist is on the floor, because we can't, it was on that very moment they couldn't do anything else.
Yeah.
So I feel like people are realizing that then change needs to happen. It's slow, but it is happening. What I would ultimately like to see is that every single venue, they ask you what you would like in your rider. So why don't they ask you what's your access needs, so that you don't feel like you always have to disclose it yourself. Like, it's a question that is there straight away. What can we do to be inclusive? What are your access needs? That's what I'd like to see across the board.
And that's really, I love walking away from panels with like lists of things to do and action. So I'm going to write that down, because I think, booking agents and, venues and, they all have booking agreements and templates that people have to fill out. And so I think it's a really simple and practical way to get venues and booking agents and people on that world thinking about other things they need to consider when booking artists. Yeah, great idea. Thanks, Eliza. Okay, so Alistair, do you want to talk to us a bit about your role at the Opera House, and also some of the experiences you've maybe observed of, music professionals and back of house people working in the Opera House who might have disability, and what that means from your perspective and how you've navigated that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm in quite a unique and very privileged role at the Opera House, because I work across the curation and programming with the head of contemporary music, Ben Marshall. But also I can get into the nitty gritty detail of the full event delivery as well. So I can see how it all connects from point A to point B. And I totally echo what Eliza was saying with there can be a lack of curatorial care. And the safety, whether it's cultural or physical, with artists, but also with staff as well, with respect to, front of house staff, if it's a very kind of aggressive style of concert, or the audience can become aggressive, whether orally or physically, with patrons or with staff. So it can be, I think you can never kind of take your foot off the pedal with kind of trying to stay sensitive to issues. Maybe as a good example, and it might be a bit of a different one, is we had Wu-Tang Clan at the Opera House a couple of years ago performing their kind of legendary album, Enter the 36 Chambers. And it was one of those moments that we were very proud of, because not many rap groups have performed in the concert hall. And, the whole crowd, it was a different crowd that didn't usually come to the Opera House statistically. And they really kind of felt comfortable there in the sense that they could stand up and dance and kind of rap along to the lyrics. But a major issue is, patrons who come to shows who have wheelchair access needs or different access needs can't see the majority of the show as soon as people stand up. So kind of breaking the cultural boundaries of a more rigid classical form for traditional contemporary music audiences is great, but then it creates these other access issues, which is not great. So something that is kind of a good project that's happening at the moment is the concert hall is actually closed, along with every other venue in the world due to COVID-19. But the concert hall was actually planned to close for renovations. And it means that we can create different access points for people with special access needs so they can stay seated or stay in their wheelchairs and kind of get a full view of the concert hall without their views or sight lines being impeded by other patrons. So there's that kind of example. There's other examples where a more recent scenario is we had the Indigenous Australian artist Ziggy Ramo perform his album Black Thoughts. And that was part of our live streamed series From Our House to Yours. You can find it on YouTube. And this is more of an example of trying to show real curatorial care and having a role of educating all of our staff. And when I say all of our staff, I mean every single person that interacts with that artist, from the point of contracting right through till them kind of finishing their performance on stage and leaving the building. And I think any artist or patron who has different access needs, it's our job as programmers and producers to think through kind of every component and make sure that there is a level of curatorial care that maintains the safety for that artist, and also maintains the longevity. I think there's a real burnout culture, especially with large institutions. We're very good at throwing a lot of processes and work at artists to give them this opportunity to work on this stage. And it's actually, it's our privilege to be able to provide this stage. And it's our role to make sure they have longevity within their careers.
Great. Morwenna, are you there?
Yes.
Hello. Hi. I wanted to get you to talk a bit about the incredible piece of research that you've just undertaken. You've just done a Churchill Fellowship and published a work around accessibility in music. Can I get you to talk a little bit about what process you went through and some of the observations you came away from that process with around accessibility in the music industry?
Yeah, of course. I was lucky enough to get a fellowship from the Churchill Trust in 2018, and I went and did that at the end of last year and got home just in time in February before the world changed. And I was interested in looking at international approaches to inclusive music programs, festivals and venues which actively engage disabled people. And I suppose I was coming to it with the research question of, well, how can the Australian music industry include more disabled artists, audiences and participants as well in music making? And so I set off on this research period over 60 days, 2 continents, 3 countries and 17 cities, and talked to 125 people from 72 organisations over 83 interviews. And did that all with my 7-month-old bud and my partner, which was obviously an amazing experience. And the people and the orgs that I spoke to, I focused on 5 key areas. So first and foremost, wanted to have some conversations with disabled musicians in the industry and hear about the experiences that they've had. I talked to music organisations who are running programs for disabled people, and talk to festivals and venues which program music inclusively, and also had a chat to a couple of music training institutions, because obviously they provide really important pathways for music to the industry. So I guess the report, which is available on the Churchill Trust website, and just let me know, and I'm very happy to send a copy to anyone who would like one. But I've got sort of chapters on those 5 different areas, but of course there's a number of cross-cutting themes that came through, and I think some of the things that were really important to doing inclusive music well were things like, of course, involving disabled people in decision making, whether that's through advisory groups, programming, leadership positions, people on the board, whatever. We need to do better around data, around diversity generally, I think, in music, but specifically disability, and what we're doing with that data that we collect, so how we're using it to make improvements to our program. As we've already talked about, I think the conversation in music is very much at the moment on the audience side of things. Everyone's, at least thought about their front of house access, but it's backstage, but then also, as Eliza said, on stage as well. And I guess I was quite shocked with how behind some of the thinking around artist access is. And I think organisations have a role to work with artists generally to upskill them in how they can make their work accessible through creative development activities as well. And I think there's a role, for organisations like the Opera House or whoever to help artists with that process of making work inclusively. interesting thoughts around programming and whether I guess some organisations take the approach of targeted programming, so specific programs showcasing disabled artists, or having inclusive mainstream programs. So I think both are valid, but kind of interesting things to think about. And the use of assistive music technology came up a lot, and I think there's some really great opportunities there around harnessing tech to help us make music more inclusive. So the report kind of finishes with 5, I guess, success factors of where to start if this is something that's new to you as a music org. And I think the first one is around just starting somewhere and thinking about achievable accessibility and, you know, what are some of those quick wins or the low-hanging fruit you can do right now. The second really important one is around researching, listening and seeking feedback. So doing your homework, but also speaking to people about what it is that they need, asking those questions about access requirements and other things. The third factor is around looking to improve your culture and responsibility as a music org. So make it embedded, build it into everything you do. It should be in everything from your project planning templates to your budget templates, you know, all of those things. The fourth is around planning and improving. So factoring those things in, looking at seeing whether you need something like a disability action plan or an access audit for your space, and work at chipping away at making those improvements over time. And I think the fifth success factor is around connection and keeping on learning. And I think today's a really great example of speaking to other colleagues in the industry around what we can all do, because I think with this work, everyone that I came across through the fellowship was so open to sharing what they're doing. It's not you know, something that there's a huge amount of competition around. Everyone just wants everyone to do better. So yeah, sharing what we know is really great. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's my 130-page report.
Wow, it sounds like such an impressive report, and I have skim read it. It's fantastic, and I'd encourage any people listening in to have a look. It's really quite illuminating and offers some really good pathways for the Australian music industry and the arts industry in general to start tackling these issues with a bit more energy and direction, because I think that's something that I've definitely encountered in the music industry, is that there is a willingness to change and participate, but sometimes people feel like they don't know where to start. And so it's really great to see work like yours that offers a really great blueprint for that change. I might move on to Jane Slingo, if you're on the line. Hi, Jane. You're on mute, so just so you know. The catchphrase of 2020. I wanted to ask you a bit, Jane, about you know, your work through EMC and also as an artist manager, and all round, you know, industry legend. Like, well, how do you approach accessibility and inclusion in your work, and what are some examples you might point to as things that inspire you as an event producer?
I think we're reasonably new on our journey to accessibility, and I think one of the really big challenges is having an organisation with the resources to actually move forward at a great pace on that journey. But we, as Morwenna just indicated, we kind of really go for the low-hanging fruit and what are the immediate things we can do, and the really the first really basic thing is actually identifying the access needs of both participants, whether they're performers or speakers or audience members, and we do that through our registration processes. And there is, you know, just care that is required. There's a little bit of manual work. It's not as simple as just an automated data capture and away you go. There's having, you know, a particular staff member or team members that actually have a direct dialogue with people that have identified a need for access, and really clarifying what those specific needs are, and then working with the production team and the programmers to make sure that we can actually deliver that, so it's a really positive experience for everyone. Obviously, the physical space and the facilities has got so much to do with it, and for us at EMC, we've got a really broad spectrum of different kinds of venues that we use, which is everything from you know, last year, for example, we held our conference in UTS's Dr. Chow Chak Wing building, which is an incredible multi-million-dollar building that has amazing facilities in terms of accessibility. So that was an absolute dream of a venue to work in. But then on our festival side, we're working with such a range of venues. We had 22 events last year. So, and particularly in Sydney, where cultural space is quite limited, we do find ourselves navigating some really challenging situations around a great live music venue, but it might be a live music venue that's in a heritage listed building, and they don't even have the basics like, you know, wheelchair access, and they aren't actually able to, because of the heritage listing around the building, put those kind of measures and accessibility measures in place. So that is, you know, that is always an ongoing kind of challenge for us. I think the key thing for us is just that initial starting point of education and having a baseline awareness. And there's some really easy things that can be done there. And one of the things that I did was actually accessible arts workshop, and that's a really great baseline. It's very affordable and cost effective, and that was a really straightforward, a half a day workshop where I walked away with a much greater awareness and some really excellent resources that we could implement immediately. And it really made us think about not just the access needs of audience and artists in terms of their experience at our event and delivering accessibility at the event, but actually that whole user journey from the very front of the first communication. So really looking at online communications and best practices in terms of how you deliver and promote your event through advertising and marketing, and how is that accessible to people. I think, you know, when it comes to that, identifying, you know, audience members or artists that are living with disability, I think there's always going to be a challenge that sometimes people just don't want to share that information, even when it's a standard question. It's really, you're not necessarily always going to capture absolutely every access need. But coming back to our point a little bit earlier about having those questions as a standard procedure, and I think that goes beyond simply organisations or venues. It goes to booking agents as well. As Eliza mentioned before, we ask for hospitality riders. Why isn't it a standard when there's a booking request for an artist that booking agents can simply write back with that form that they filled out and say, please explain the access needs of your venue? So it starts to become a second nature procedure to people. And I think finally, when exploring how you can be better in terms of offering accessibility, I think one of the bigger challenges too is actually identifying people who are living with disability that is invisible, that is not a visible disability. So yeah. And I think you asked too for some examples of things that I've heard.
We can come back to that if you want, because I think you had some really great points there around how we can all, the various different parts of the music and arts industry all have a role to play in making our industry more accessible. And I think the idea of an access and inclusion rider is a fantastic thing to standardize within the music industry. And I think there's some really good touch points or pressure points we can target as an industry in terms of like booking agent groups and encouraging them to think about what access means for their artists that they book, and also for the venues that they use, and also the things that they offer for various audiences. Okay, so maybe we will talk a little bit about I think we should maybe now talk about some of the inspiring things that we've seen, that we've come across as event producers, as musicians, as, people working in the music industry. And this is sort of a question to the panel as a whole. What is something that you found particularly inspiring, or an example of someone doing a really fantastic thing? It could be your own organisation that you're really proud of, something that you've done, or an example of someone you've seen, or an event that focuses on something that you're really proud of and think is a good way forward. Because I think it's always really important to share positive examples or inspiring examples, so we can all equally be inspired. Now, Alistair, I've seen you put your hand up, so I will throw to you first.
Yeah, I just really was quite inspired and energized by what Jane was saying. And this is kind of doubles into your question, Emily. Because a couple of the things that I've found really inspiring over the years, but especially during COVID-19, is just talking to artists. Like, it's one of the greatest privileges that I have, is just to be able to shut up in a room and listen to people and be accepting to be wrong. I think it's no secret that there's a lot of big personalities and egos in the music industry. And I think we're starting to learn to put that aside and just listen to people, and especially people with access needs. So a big shout out to the organization ICE and Sam Warrett and Victoria Harbert. We've done a lot of work with them, creating an accessible kind of recording studio environment called Remix the House, where artists who are on the autism spectrum are able to come in and create a record and collaborate. And I think a general rule that I've learned that I've really kind of been trying to put into practice more meeting with artists during COVID-19 is we're a large organization that is very intimidating, and just having less of us in the room creates more space for artists to feel more comfortable to tell their truths, and it creates more space for us to listen. So that's more of a back of house project that I find really inspiring, and it's not something that is public facing, but I think some of the best work that we can do in large institutions is be more invisible and provide better platforms for artists with access needs. And then the only other thing I wanted to touch on quickly is during COVID-19, it's been an opportunity to work directly with artists. And because we're creating works specifically for camera, there's a level of kind of tight rehearsal that needs to happen for it to translate well. So for example, we have this live stream on Saturday called In the Mood, which is a new song cycle featuring Rainbow Chan, Marcus Whale, and Eugene Choi. And we've been rehearsing in Carriage Works for 2 weeks, and we're able to live caption it to a T. And it's in English, it's in Cantonese. There are some bossa nova dance moves. So it feels like a real privilege to be able to kind of create contemporary music work in a different way, but make it far more accessible than usually what we're able to do in the actual concert hall itself.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alistair. I will come back to the things we can learn from the new digital world we find ourselves in as a result of COVID. But Eliza, do you want to talk to us about something that, as a musician and performing artist, that has inspired you?
Yeah, look, I think the most accessible music festival I was ever part of was Dylan Alcott's Ability Fest. That was pretty great. Like, just also because they had representation of disabled artists on stage. That's, you don't see disabled artists on stage, and there are disabled artists in Australia. Lots of them, lots of incredible, talented artists, and yet we're still not seeing them on our mainstream stages. And so it was incredible to not only see disabled artists on like a massive stage, but there was also loads of access needs that were taken in account. So there was accessible parking right out the front of the festival so that you could roll in in style and get out. It was really great for me to be able to load in that way as well, to have space where I could just be right at the venue. It was also the first festival stage that had like a way to get up on the stage with a lift, which was so cool. I loved that. And right away, I just had the energy to perform. So it was so great. There was also viewing platforms, so that wheelchair users could be at the same level as the stage, which was awesome. And it was so great just to be on that viewing platform and to see wheelchair users. One of my friends was a wheelchair user, and she was like, this is what I've always wanted. Like, I just felt included. They had Auslan interpreter on stage for every single performance. And they also had relaxed areas where you could go and chill. There was also great like flooring all over the grass for wheelchair users as well, or for people that needed that. Yeah, it was great. It's exactly what it should always be like.
I think that festival is a fantastic template of, the things we should all be doing when putting on events that both platform and showcase the amazing talent from artists with disability, and also, for audiences and music professionals who are back of house who can also work in that space. And yeah, I think there's a lot to be learnt from, that kind of experience or that kind of event presentation, because it goes beyond wheelchair access and the very basic understanding that we all, the broader society seems to have about access needs, and looks to things like,
just on that, like, I just also think as a model, it proved the point that if you provide access for your audience, then you're going to get the audience. They're going to come. They're going to spend money. And so festivals start thinking about this and start opening up for audience members to be part of your festival. Like, we're going to come. And so I think that was a real model that proved that point.
Yeah, and I think there's a real opportunity for festivals and venues and event producers in Australia to, see those models and learn from them, and realise that actually it's not as hard as you think. And everyone assumes it's like, oh, we're a heritage building and we can't afford to get a wheelchair access, therefore we won't do any access work at all. So I think, that's a really fantastic template. If anyone watching or listening today has not heard of it, check it out, because it's a really fantastic example. Morwenna, do you want to talk to us a bit about I know you met with like 100, how many people while you were on your wonderful world journey? So I'm sure you've got lots of examples for us around people doing incredible things, but maybe just like a few sort of really key things that you think might work for the Australian market.
Yeah. Look, probably three. I'll probably just give you a very quick venue, festival and music org example. I think Eliza's already spoken really beautifully about Dylan's festival. And I think on the festival front, the one that I was the most impressed with internationally was Glastonbury. They've had an access program for about a decade. Very similar kind of approach to what the Ability Fest here has done. But I think something else that festival's doing that impressed me is they've given a lot of care and consideration to the accessible campsite side of things as well, because I think when we talk about multi-day music festivals, that can add a whole nother level of complication. But that is something that they're managing to do really well. They're also involving a lot of disabled volunteers in the festival as well. So I think, as Eliza was saying, just having that presence of people on the ground and involving people in all sorts of different ways is great. And, they know that, access is an ongoing journey and there's always more to do. So they've just started looking at, well, how can we provide various chill out spaces in a festival environment? And they're starting also to do some work around audio description and what that might look like in a festival environment. On the venue side of things, one really interesting venue in London that I came across is the Battersea Arts Centre. And in February this year, just before the world changed, they announced that they had become the world's first fully relaxed venue. So every single performance now that happens at that venue is what you call a relaxed performance, which here in Australia sometimes we refer to as sensory friendly performances. So often for people on the autism spectrum. And I think that's a really interesting model of, rather than just having, a select number of things that are accessible, we're going to be completely relaxed with everything we do. And you're not going to perform here if you won't do a relaxed version of your show, which is really cool. And on the classical side of things, because I know there's a couple of classical people joining us today, was super impressed with the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra. They had some funding from Arts Council England for a program called Change Makers, which funds a disabled person to be in your organisation for a period of time. And I guess that's about kind of involving disabled people and making change from within. And they worked with an amazing young conductor called James Rose, who has cerebral palsy. And he worked with, they put together an ensemble of disabled musicians recruited from around the world. And they played at the BBC Proms in 2018 on the main stage as part of the general prom series. So there's just a couple of great international examples to give people some food for thought.
Fantastic. And I might do another sort of panel question around COVID and the, I guess, maybe looking at some of the challenges that's created for, artists and audiences with disability, but also like maybe the benefits as well. I think there has been a lot of people who have spoken about the increased access due to things being live streamed where they maybe hadn't ever done that before. So who would like to speak to that experience from a COVID context? Anyone? Alistair, yeah.
I think I'll be quick because I always talk far too much when I'm answering these questions. But I think one of the great things has been having time. I think as an industry, we're really good at saying we're so busy and we're working till 1 a.m. because we have all these hot international calls with people in LA and London. But it's just been really great to focus on the really excellent local artists that we have and creating platforms and giving them space to commission them to create new works. And essentially, I think the live stream from our house to yours format at the Opera House has been a great opportunity to kind of throw open the doors, so to speak, and let artists do kind of their passion projects and experiment a little bit. It's okay to fail, or, some things might be successful, some things might not be. And I think we can take a lot of learnings from staging works in this period into the future.
Great, thanks. Eliza, you put your hand up.
Yeah, look, I mean, to be honest, I can't really see any negatives about COVID in terms of for access anyhow, other than live music is pretty much non-existent right now.
There is that.
A negative. Yeah, it's impacted my bank account. What are the benefits though? Like just recently I created it's called Accessible All Areas with Isolate with Emily Ullman. We created an event that I was really proud of, and it was accessible in, I stated right at the beginning that I knew that I couldn't get it 100% right, and I'll never state that I can. I'm always learning, and I want to continue to learn. I want to continue to do better. So I stated that right at the beginning, but it was a really great way. I got a lot of emails from people with disabilities stating that to be able to be at home and to be in bed, be wherever you feel comfortable, and to be able to be part of live music and feel like you're included was really great for people. And we had an Auslan interpreter. We did some audio descriptions for people with that are blind or with low vision. We had captioning, and it was also a way that we could feature disabled artists. So, 3 disabled artists that were international were part of it. And so just great to see that representation. And it was a mix of music and interviews. So we all spoke about, I interviewed each guest about what it is to be a disabled and or deaf artist. And so it was really incredible to hear their insight and their knowledge and their experiences. And really great for people at home to be able to be part of that as disabled people and non-disabled people, to hear these conversations happen and to have, people think about it, because that's where it all starts. Conversation makes change and starts that action. So
sure does. Well,
very proud of that.
You're getting a lot of love on the chat line about your
I feel really proud of it, and I think it's just a way that we can keep doing this, we can bring live music to people wherever you are. That's a great thing that COVID has created.
Absolutely. It's like democratizing, the music industry a little bit, and making not everyone's, but, like a much broader experience for everyone, all being from home. Jane, do you want to speak to this a little bit around the COVID impact?
Yeah, I definitely echo Eliza and Alistair's comments. I think COVID, for me and for a lot of people in my professional network, I think COVID has really highlighted what it feels like to have barriers to live music experiences. So people that don't live with disability all of a sudden really understand what that feels like. And so I think that's really amplified the focus on when we move towards that new normal, we have a duty to really make sure that we don't simply go back to old ways or minimize the digital offer, but actually how do we make that better, and how do we sit digital experiences alongside music experiences in the traditional space to continue to deliver really amazing live music experiences to those that experience barriers regardless of whether there's a pandemic or not. And I think that's really exciting, and I feel grateful actually that we have the time to give this really deep thought.
And also now that we've proven that we can, we have no excuse. Morwenna, what about you?
Just to add, I think, on what everyone else said, but with the slow return to live music, obviously disabled people can be in the more vulnerable end of the community. And so I guess comfort in terms of disabled people coming back to live events might be slower on the uptake for lots of valid reasons. So I think, just making sure that we don't return to no digital events and keeping them present is really important. And I watched another great panel and festival that called the Platform Live Festival, put on by Riverina Arts a few months ago, and there was an artist, Ricky Buchanan, who talked about as a disabled artist that she's been able to access so much more content for particularly for her as someone that is bedridden, often having to watch things in sort of 10-minute chunks. So I think digital events are great, but also the kind of having the recording available after so people can watch things in their own time is another kind of really important thing to consider.
Fantastic. I just want to let everyone know that if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll try and get to them. We've got about 10 minutes left. Morwenna, while I have you, I wouldn't mind actually hearing a little bit about the UK-based organisation Attitude is Everything, and just talk us through their, I've spoken to you about this, their, accessibility, what do you call it, a scheme, yeah, exactly, and talk a bit about what they do as an organisation and how long they've been running and that. Tell us about them.
Yeah. So they're an amazing UK-based organisation, charity that's been running for 20 years, disabled-led, and they're basically a service organisation for live music and accessibility. So we don't have anything like that here yet, but maybe one day. And in the meantime, I'm really keen to just pinch all of their ideas, and they're very, very willing to share them, which is great. And they do all sorts of things from, training and consulting work. But I guess the thing that they've really made their name for is they've developed this best practice charter for festivals and venues across the UK. So over 200 organisations signed up, and it's a really interesting kind of rating system, bronze, silver, gold. So there's these requirements that you meet to meet each rating, and there's a really clear sort of demonstration of what you need to do to achieve, the next rating on the ladder. And I think because what we've talked about is a lot of organisations don't necessarily don't know what they don't know. So the charter really spells things out really clearly, and having an organisation like Attitude to work with and kind of hold hands as you're going through has been something that's been really successful over there.
Fantastic.
We're hoping to bring here.
Yeah, well, I hope you do too. So we've got a question coming through, and I thought just because we've got limited time left, we might just start looking at some of the questions, and this one might be good for you, Morwenna. So Kelsey has asked, what are some requirements, or what is best practice when creating a relaxed performance? Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So relaxed performance, something that I think the theatre sector has been doing particularly well here for a number of years, and we're just sort of starting to think about in a music context. And, another shameless plug, but my report's got a whole whole section on kind of what a relaxed performance can include, and there's lots of different ways and things that it can include. So I think, number one, obviously, if you're looking to run something like this for the first time, doing some consultation about what people with sensory impairment in your community might be looking for. But often it can be things like leaving the house lights up, making sure that there's not sort of dramatic lighting or sound changes, lowering volumes for things, keeping the doors open, having a chill out space that's not in the main auditorium that people can go to if they need to either have some quiet time or some time to stim. And also just thinking about information, accessible communication that people get around relaxed events. So whether that might be a virtual tour of the venue on a video that people can see before they come, so they know what it's going to look like and how it's going to feel on the day, to programs around the content in an accessible format, again in advance. So lots of different ideas, and I think it's a really exciting space and something that again is sort of a bit of a low-hanging fruit in terms of it's adapting what we're already doing, but just making some changes to make it work for more people. So that's definitely something that I think all music organisations in any genres, classical, contemporary, whatever, can really kind of look to adopt.
Fantastic. And while I've got you, Lisa has asked a question around, is there a document or a guide that might, be able to cover a broad basis of best practice and recommendations in terms of things like strobe lighting and wheelchair access and broad, I guess, support for people putting on events or welcoming people into their space about how to be more inclusive and accessible?
Yeah, a couple of different ideas. Accessible Arts have some great resources on their website. I also really like the City of Sydney's accessible events guidelines as well, which I think gives some really good information. And again, I've just received some funding to produce some training and resource material around my work. So by the end of the year, I'll have some great things up online for free that people can access as well. And Carly's online and saying that Melbourne Fringe have a really great guide as well. It's in the chat and it is an excellent guide. So that's another good one to have a look at.
Yeah, fantastic. I might get some of the other panelists on to talk about, we have sort of brought up this idea of low-hanging fruit, and I think there is an assumption from people who maybe don't know much about accessibility and inclusion that to do that work and to be accessible and to be inclusive, requires like $100,000 and specific funding and all this resourcing and financing that maybe arts organisations and arts practitioners or music venues feel they can't afford, and that's often an excuse as to why they haven't undertaken some work. Can I maybe, any ideas on what some really simple things or, inexpensive things that we can do that require consideration and effort that we can do to be more inclusive and accessible in the work we do? Jane, do you want to speak to that?
I did mention it at the very start of this panel, but honestly, the shameless plug, but Accessible Arts didn't put me up to this, but their workshop, the introductory workshop was really, really valuable. And I can't remember the exact price, but it was a little over $100, somewhere between 100 and 200. Don't quote me on that. But it gave some really excellent resources. And look, already in the chat thread, there's a number of fantastic links being shared. It's really just a matter of there's free resources. It's just a matter of investing the time and then making sure that you communicate to your wider team, because everyone needs to be on that journey. It can't just be the leader of an organization. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean, I've also done that course and found it so useful in terms of really practical advice and, guidance around language, things to consider when putting on events that aren't just about, often we assume it's about, physical disability, or, all the different types of things we can do, including like everyone's website needs a whole lot of work to be more accessible. And I think, I know Accessible Arts is doing some great work around guiding people through the digital space. So I'm really looking forward to, getting our website from Music New South Wales up to scratch, and also looking at other things you can do in terms of like venues having walkthrough videos on their website, or a whole range of things that really take into consideration people with different access needs. Al, did you want to have a chat? Do you want to speak to something?
Yeah, just a few things that Gig Buddies is a fantastic organisation that the accessibility team at the Opera House put me onto, and we've worked with them across the program at Vivid Live. It's as simple as just putting some tickets out of your allocation reserved for your events, and then Gig Buddies kind of handle the administration. So people with different access needs can pair up with a partner or a friend, and they can kind of help curate that journey for them, and communicate with organizations like ours or event promoters to make that quite a seamless transition for the audience. From an artist perspective, very simple one is just creating a phone line, a safety phone line. For Ziggy Ramo, for example, it's a very traumatic performance when he did Black Thoughts as part of the digital stage. Every person in that performance was a person of color, and creating a personable access line is really important in very large organizations that are predominantly white. And so kind of creating systems that aren't necessarily across the board all the time, but can be curated sensitively to the necessities of artists and those events is really important. And then something that is super simple, predominantly for clubs and more aggressive forms like rap music, is just don't use strobes. And I love strobes, but hey, you can have a great time without strobe lighting. We had an artist that required no strobe lighting because they are sensitive to epilepsy. The last time we did some studio parties in Vivid Live, and we were still able to make kind of an amazing kind of club design with lasers and lots of haze. So I think just kind of, those are just a few simple things that can help.
Yeah, fantastic. I've just seen a really great comment from Carly in the chat field around artists speaking up about access needs, and that it's not necessarily about disclosing disability. That isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about access needs, and when working with venues or festivals, that it's really great for those festivals and venues to ask for your access needs and not expect you to disclose what you're dealing with.
On that point, just do your research. Like, it's our role as programmers and producers to do your research. It's called the internet. There's a lot of information on there, and usually you can find things out for yourself and not rely on the artists to disclose their personal information.
Yeah, but I think it's really good to normalise and standardise the idea of asking for access needs regardless.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Eliza, do you want to speak to us about some really simple things?
As you just said, so that it becomes just common practice. So venues just automatically ask you what your access needs are. It'd be great if venues also had that ability to, on their website, to have your access needs as an audience member as well, so that you can list what they are, and that just be common practice.
Have you seen venues do, or websites that are a good example of what that might look like from an audience perspective in terms of what they offer? What are some of those things?
Bigger venues like Melbourne Art. I'm trying to think. I've got a mental
Art Centre.
Yeah, the Art Centre. That's what I want to say. Yeah, so they were great with that. But yeah, it'd be great to see the smaller live music venues as well. Even if they just listed it on their website, what they've actually got, like whether they have a ramp, whether they have an accessible toilet. Often you want to go see your favorite band and you have to ring and you can't get through, and then you're on hold, and then you get an answering machine and you don't know if you can go and see your favorite band. So just to have that listed on your website as common practice, or to be asked when you book a ticket what your access needs are, would be really great. what, you know, a simple thing that I think venues can do is what you also listed, is training around disability. I know, like, as a punter, I went to see one of my really favorite bands and walked into the venue, and my partner was standing next to me, and we wanted to know whether I could have a chair so I could sit down and watch the band. And for some reason, the manager didn't talk to me. He talked to my partner. So he's just like, so what does she need? It's like, I'm right, I'm right here. You can talk to me. So just, I guess that training would be really great in how to, you know, have people with disability in your venue and treat them the right way would be really great. Also, I think,
and that being a whole of organisation thing, not just the manager saying, yeah, we do it, but actually the security guards, the bar staff, everyone involved.
Everybody, yeah. So that, you know, those stigmas and misconceptions are reduced. So it'd be really great for it to feel inclusive as an audience member and as a performer. Also, just as I said before, I feel like if venues have a show where they are going to have an Auslan interpreter, and you promote it, that you are going to have an Auslan interpreter, you are going to open up your audience. So, you know, I think venues are really scared to spend the money, but I truly believe if we start to spend the money, these venues will receive the money back. We have money to spend in your venue. So you start to make those changes, and you will see those people arrive. And they're, you know, we want to experience live music. We want to spend money in your venue.
Untapped market, says Eliza. Fantastic. Morwenna.
Eliza, such a good point around, I guess one of the things I was interested in when talking to people was like, why are you doing this? What's your rationale for access for the people that are doing it well? And there's kind of 4 reasons. Big one being business case. You know, in the UK, they talk about something called the purple pound, which is that disabled households in the UK have, I think it was a $250 billion kind of amount to spend on things. So it's a lot of money we're talking about. I think also there's a real artistic rationale here in terms of programming. You know, people from diverse backgrounds, you know, moral imperatives, of course, too, and also legislative requirements as well, you know, so there's kind of 4 key areas. But on the low-hanging fruit, there's a brilliant guide that I will find and put in the chat before the end of the session from Attitude is Everything, called the DIY Grassroots Guide, and it's basically designed for bands, and it's a list of things that bands can do for kind of low or no cost to make their own gigs accessible. And a lot of that is around, you know, conversations that you might have with your venue around what information goes up online, through to even things like how to do your own DIY captioning at a gig. So there's lots of good ideas in that guide, and I'll find it and put it in the chat.
Yeah, and Liz from Accessible Arts has also pointed to some great resources on the Accessible Arts website around how to best tackle some of these great new opportunities for music industry. Is there any other questions come through? I can see one here from Morwenna. Morwenna, wondering which website you'll be putting your resources on when you get to it.
Oh, yeah, great question. For the moment, just follow me on any social media. I'm designing my own website at the moment, which is where they will live. And yeah, we'll make sure organisations like Accessible Arts, I'm sure will very generously kind of share and get the word out as well.
Fantastic, thank you. There's a question from Ruth O'Brien, which I'm just going to read out. One of the biggest access barriers for me is the heavy lifting of equipment. With this in mind, why is it not just a work health and safety standard to have wheelchair accessible stages in venues? No disrespect to any of the panelists, but these things are basic, shouldn't be incredible or inspiring. They just need to be. You don't want to be singled out as special. It'd also be much easier and safer for everyone, including non-disabled roadies and tech staff, if these basic access requirements were made to be the new standard. Anyone want to speak to that? I think from my perspective in Music New South Wales, we're absolutely looking to standardise these, very necessary changes to the industry, and part of the work that we're doing at Music New South Wales is trying to work with music venues to get them on board with what we also agree is very important changes, and they are about just fair and equitable access to music. They're not incredible or inspiring, but we are also in a situation where we need good examples of people leading the way, and I think sharing those examples offer a great opportunity to encourage those who have avoided the work. And so yeah, that's why I like to talk about good examples of things people are doing, because as we've seen with Ability Fest, I think there'll be a lot of festival promoters who would say it's too hard, and then Dylan Alcott went and proved that it's absolutely not too hard. It's absolutely possible. So yeah, what else have we got here coming through the questions? What kind of training should venue staff undertake to ensure that they are acting with care to people and artists with access requirements? Alistair or Morwenna, or Jane, who would like to speak to this issue?
I'm happy to speak to this issue, and it's an ongoing issue that I think there is no clear cut kind of set of circumstances where you can go, you do this training thing, you go on this PowerPoint, then you do this quiz, and then you are set. I think it's similar to the kind of nuts and bolts of traditional safety requirements when you work with rigging. I think it needs constant updating and constant socializing with all staff. I think there was mention of security earlier. I think with front of house staff, with security, with programmers, it's just constant kind of socializing and cultural upkeep to make sure that we are creating the most accessible space possible. I can also speak to the building front. The Opera House, everyone knows, was built in the 60s. It opened in 1973. It's probably the least accessible space from a physical point of view. It is a pointy white space with lots of white people inside it, and it can be very intimidating. So there has been kind of a lot of work during the decade of renewal to make it more accessible for people with access needs. So I don't have a straightforward answer that I can kind of put in a pithy kind of couple of minutes, but there is kind of a big kind of access page on the Opera House website, but educating our staff is probably the best thing that we can do and dedicate the most time to.
Fantastic, thanks Alistair. Morwenna?
Look, there's a lot of different training options out there, and I'm a trainer with Accessible Arts and People with Disability Australia, and there's lots of different training options, and yes, they can be tailored to particular organisations, but I think the best thing, just speaking really frankly, is having people work with you, employing disabled staff. If that's not something you're currently doing, disability advisory groups, having those regular conversations with people and having people in your space as well, because that's where you kind of really learn things, is kind of working with people rather than a 1 hour training session, which is great. But I think it's, thinking about how you're going to engage with disabled people in an ongoing way. And, because there's no kind of, we're never going to learn everything there is to learn about access. It's always an ongoing journey, and we're always going to strive to do better, and talking and working with people, I think, is the best way for that to happen.
Absolutely, and everyone being prepared to make mistakes and realise that that's how we all learn and change. Any other questions coming through the chat that I've maybe missed? Not that I can see. Okay. We've had a really good chat around some of the things we can do to improve the music industry around access and inclusion. From, I think what's come through for us today is that it's important to have these conversations about what we can do, and that there's plenty to learn for everyone involved. I would also like to say that I think there's some really good examples of other organisations doing great work, and sharing those is really important for us, particularly in the work that I do. I love to see some good examples of people doing things well. And I think, you know, there's some really great work we could do as a group, or, you know, people working together around communicating, you know, the different needs that people have, and getting the rest of the music industry on board. And Eliza, I think your ideas around a rider would be, you know, or the language included in riders would be really fantastic to see. And I'm definitely going to start encouraging all the booking agents that we work with to start looking at that. One more question from above. Are there any grants for bands to make gigs accessible? From what I know, there's nothing specifically around accessibility in New South Wales, but that often you can apply for grant rounds that and include the, you know, so it's not specifically around accessibility that I know of, but I mean, this is when I'll call on the rest of the panelists in New South Wales to speak to that. Creative Victoria has done some really great programs. Maybe someone from Accessible Arts, if they know anything through their work, they could come on. Morwenna, do you have something to add around grants?
Yeah, look, just that, you know, a number of years ago, it was probably 5 years ago now, the Australia Council finally added a line for access costs in all the budget templates for all of their grants programs. So I guess rather than a specific grant to make gigs accessible for bands, it's kind of around building in access for every project that you're doing. And I think the reason I get excited about templates is it makes everyone think about that as they're filling in a grant. So now every applicant to the Australia Council has to at least go, what does this line mean? And what could I be doing to make my thing accessible? So I think that's been a really positive change in the funding landscape in Australia.
And Liz from Accessible Arts has just said that you can include a budget line within your application specifically around access, and that it would, yeah, that is a good thing. Or, you know, whether you're applying to Create New South Wales or Australia Council, that including a budget line to ensure your event is accessible and inclusive is a good thing. Jane?
I think too, you know, with a number of state grant programs as well as Commonwealth grant programs, those funding bodies have identified people living with disability, audiences with disability, artists living with disability as priority groups. So I think you can get a little bit creative, and whilst there may not be a specific grant program for accessibility costs or an accessibility project, you know, there are a lot of quick turnaround grants that you could apply through that, or you could get a group of artists together to form a collective and put in a project application that's around you know, creating some kind of accessibility program that's going to benefit a number of bands rather than just one. Just an idea.
Fantastic. Okay, well, unless anyone else has any more questions, we might wrap it up there. I'd like to thank Accessible Arts for hosting us today, and all of the fantastic panelists, Eliza, Jane, Morwenna and Alistair, for coming along and sharing your thoughts and ideas. I'd like to thank the Auslan interpreters for their fantastic work. And yeah, if anyone has any questions or, you know, wants to follow up, get in touch with Accessible Arts and they can point you to any of us if need be. And yeah, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your Thursday. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us.